Good afternoon on this February 26th, 22 afternoon when a cold wind blows outside. I'd swear all the way from my homeland. A chilling thing. And so I sit inside deeply, deeply troubled by the war that's going on in the Ukraine. As you know, my sympathy is always war is evil, no matter what the context or pretext. Even when we can justify it, it's still an evil thing. And so we must do all we can to, in my view, end war altogether, which can be done. But specifically to end this war, and the first step, of course, is understanding what the other side wants. What's the terms of peace? And on my left over here on the screen is a speech by President Putin, which basically lays out their side of the argument as well as it's ever done. And if you don't kind of trust his view of it, I recommend Noam Chomsky, considered the Galileo of our time and a great, great intellect I deeply, deeply respect. Read his take on what we're not seeing in the big picture of things over there, how in fact we are complicit in the war. And of course the way of undoing all that is to begin with awareness. And Putin simply draws attention to what I and others have spoken of, which is broken promises. When the wall came down, the promise was no NATO on Russian borders. And so ask that countries in between be allowed to be neutral, enjoy economic treaties if they want, but enjoy the prosperity of Europe and how they can tie into it and all that stuff. All it's fine. In fact, Gorbachev imagined the whole Euro-Asian region as a one huge economic zone. And the reason I've been told, read, that Reagan turned that down and insisted on NATO is because we were afraid of that powerhouse. Who knows, huh? What goes on behind the scenes. What we do know is that the Russians have, and as he well articulates, over the past 40 years, step by step by step, those countries becoming NATO, right up to Russian borders. And he's drawing the line at Ukraine. Now, we can debate whether that's a good idea, bad idea, what's that all about, and Putin, and so on and so forth. But for the sake of peace in that region, seems to me a real trade-off, decent one, is Ukraine be neutral, which is what he wanted in the first place. Now he's got the world's attention. And the deal is a neutral Ukraine, a treaty guaranteed by the United Nations, so on and so forth. With this by everybody. No NATO in Ukraine. Everybody gets what they want. So I do encourage anyone listening to this that the first step in ending any war is to pay attention to what the other side wants. And in this case, it's not an unreasonable demand, request. There's a basis for it in history. And wouldn't it be a wonderful thing, in fact, if NATO were done away with, which, by the way, President Trump wanted to do, which I totally agree with, because we've been in this crisis now. And in fact, Europe does become one big economic zone. Why not? Russia's got a lot of oil and gas and all huge steps for growing food and so on and so forth. It becomes sort of the breadbasket of Europe. Like we're the breadbasket of the world in many ways here. Of course, that's the problem. It all comes down to markets and stuff like that. But let us be grand and step aside and take one step to end this war with the idea of making our great-great-grandparents promise to us that the war to end all war, World War I, which is what they hoped would come of it. That's why they passed the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928, the law to end war. We forget that's on the books, to be enforced. That work to be done, they saw the horror of and were shocked. And we have to remember that in our time we've gotten so desensitized to the brutality of war that we forget how awful it is until it visits us. And of course that's the problem, right? I mean, deep in our bones, none of us wants to experience war. I mean, it's so bad we have to train people to do it. And we can't have a world without war if we want it. We just got to vote for it in large numbers. And while I have your attention, my pet peeve these days, pet cause these days, is the women and children of Afghanistan. We're starving them by the millions. And I say we're starving them because we're holding in our banks something like $7 trillion of their wealth, or $1 billion, whatever it is. It's a large number, $7 billion, I think, of their wealth, which Biden refuses to release to them, being bad losers. They won. The money's theirs by law. He's going to give half of it to 9/11 victims. Well, if you want to compensate the 9/11 victims more, you should turn to Saudi Arabia. Taliban didn't do that. And to give them back the money, I plead, anybody, if you understand what I'm saying, we're starving in the name of women's liberation, by the way. Millions of Afghan women and children, so much so that there is a group, as I understand it, of Afghan women rights group in Washington trying to make some noise. I don't hear much from American feminists so far. Speak up if you are listening to this. To encourage Joe Biden to release the money, all of the fucking money, as soon as possible. It's the right thing to do. And Joe Biden, as a good Catholic, you should know better. God bless.